Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Bunmi Banjo, who is currently the CEO at Kuvora Incorporated. Bunji is going to be talking with me, and we'll be engaging in a conversation about creating a learning culture through digital upskilling and future-proofing the digital age. Before we go further, Bunji, could you please give us, Bunmi, could you please give us a little bit of an update on your history, which is quite impressive?
Thank you. Good afternoon and good to meet you. Like you mentioned, I currently run a company called Kuvora. What we do at Kuvora in a nutshell is to prepare organizations and individuals for the future of work. That covers several areas around digital transformation or strategy of operations, as well as skilling programs, so helping organizations develop capacity building programs for their employees. The company has been in existence for just over 2 years. Before Kuvora, I led brand and reputation for Google in Africa. I was at Google for about 6.5 years. Most of my time there was spent on helping African businesses and youth take advantage of technology, specifically the internet, to find growth, either in terms of business revenues or their skills or getting a job. Towards the end of my time at Google, I launched a program called Digital Skills for Africa, where we trained 1 million young people across the continent, covering 29 countries within a 10-month period, and subsequently went on to train a couple more million since then. So it's a very highly skilled program focused on helping to solve the problem of skills development, especially where it relates to technology in Africa. And essentially that's when I got involved in these conversations about leveraging technology and artificial intelligence and preparing young people for the future of work. So that's in a nutshell what it is. I'm very passionate about this area. I think there's a lot of potential on the continent that we can begin to realize, and I think we have started to realize with just young people taking advantage of technology via their mobile phones a lot of times to create employment opportunities for themselves, to improve their communities, and so on.
Thank you very much. I think that a key element in the spread of digital and work opportunities through Africa is mobile. I feel that the African continent has skipped the desktop and laptop entirely. For most continent, their first experience with and only experience is through the mobile. And it's an accelerated access in a way. Are you finding that there's a difference in digital spread in Africa because of mobile predominance versus in other parts of the world?
Yeah, I think that, it's, I guess you could say, a blessing and a curse, right? It's a blessing because it eases the access. The barriers to getting online are so much lower than they used to be, because if you can gather funds and buy a, first or second generation smartphone that might even be used, you can get a connection. So that's been a great thing, I think. You get the benefits of having access to information and things that come with that. Where I think it took sort of a little bit of effort for it to become utilized appropriately is the fact that mobile phones are primarily for communication, and for the first few years of us using mobile to access the web, that's essentially what we used it for across the continent, right? It was a great communication tool, but a lot of people that do have access to the web did not realize until very recently how much more they could do on their mobile phone. I think that's changing a lot now. I think people are realizing that you it's just with your phone, rather than just using it as a chat device. You could actually use it to, access relationships or build connections around the world that could potentially help you accomplish objectives you set for yourself. So I think with a little bit of effort, we're seeing that advantage now.
And I guess it's also becoming a very important learning tool.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of apps, education apps, K through 12 education, even especially for primary and secondary education, but also for skilling specifically for different types of jobs, vocational skills, communication skills, and so on. I mean, at this point, there's really no type of skill you want to learn that you can't learn on your mobile phone, either through one of the available MOOCs, the online platforms, or who all have apps at this point, or through videos like, on YouTube. So absolutely.
So on the topic of skilling, there's a bit of a dilemma at the moment in the world, because with the advent of artificial intelligence and other automation in the workplace, some people believe that jobs are being displaced, and others believe that jobs are being created. And for example, research company Gartner has predicted that 2.3 million jobs will be created through AI and automation.
Right.
Whereas Kinsey Global says that the technology adoption could displace millions of jobs. It's a classic case of the glass half full, half empty, I guess. And it just means that regardless of what your point of view, if you fail to adapt,
absolutely,
you are going to fail. And that brings us to the reskilling. I think that governments need to step up, and so do business leaders, by prioritizing the reskilling of the workforce to cope with this transformation.
Yeah.
Would you say that this reskilling process has already started, and if so, to what extent, especially in Africa?
Absolutely. The reskilling process started, I would say, in the last 3 to 4 years, at least in my experience. There are a lot of organizations that are involved in helping people to sort of prepare mentally for the shifts that are coming, because that ability to actually prepare and adapt in itself is a skill. To be able to be comfortable with change and to be able to realize that, you might have a certain job description today, and it might be what you've done for the last 10 or 15 years, but in a few years that job might not exist. And to sort of learn to be okay with that, I think that in itself has been an area that a lot of organizations have been involved in, and actually getting folks in the future of work type conversations to come in and encourage the employees to be open to those kinds of changes. In terms of would it be a net loss situation or net gain? In my view, technology has always led to a net gain in terms of employment. The difference is that the types of jobs might be different, right? So the types of jobs that we got with the advent of the third wave of technology in the last 100 or so years, they're very different from the types of jobs we had a couple of years before. It's just the society is shifting, and the types of things that people do to put money in their pocket it's becoming different. There are some things that remain the same, but maybe how they're done will be different, right? So if you think about artisans, for example, we're probably always going to need plumbing, right? And it might take a minute before you have, a robot take care of plumbing in your house. You're probably going to need the services of a plumber. But over time, plumbers may have to rely on technology differently, and that requires them to retool, to reskill. So that's sort of on the individual business provider basis. In terms of large organizations, I think one of the challenges that they're currently facing is the fact that while CEOs know that the environment is shifting, technology is quickly adapting and changing, there's no clear understanding of where we're going to land. And I think that sort of sense of like not knowing where we're headed, it can be a little bit, discomforting for people, leaders and employees as alike. So I think that just sort of comes to the point of all of us sort of, it's almost like everyone has to get to a point where you start to get comfortable with not knowing what the future would look like. In the workforce, even a decade ago, people would make 3 and 5 and 10-year plans for their careers, right? Organizations will have a 5-year road plan and a 10-year road plan even. It's very difficult to do that realistically today. I think the most important thing is to be open to these changes, be very connected to what's going on in the technology space, so that as technology improves, you're bringing that into the business and adapting it. And then having a very agile workforce that is ready to shift how they do work in a very short period of time. So those are the types of skills I think that employers can spend this period sort of training people on. How to have a growth mindset, for example, right? How to be able to feel comfortable with shifting how you do things, or realizing that just because you've always done things a certain way doesn't mean you must always do it that way. So I think that's really where it is.
A generational issue as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, younger people, millennials and, Gen Y and Z are a lot more comfortable with these changes, right? Because they've sort of grown up with it. I'm sort of in the middle, sort of, generation cut in between the tech natives and sort of the older folks. And my generation is a mix, right? Some of us are trying to adapt. It's not easy, but we're trying to sort of do these types of things. But for some of us, it's difficult, especially if you're in very fixed sort of careers. If you think about like traditional careers where you spend, so many years preparing and schooling and studying and, and then you're finally practicing and then you're hearing this buzz about like things might shift. It's kind of, it's uncomfortable, but
some industries are more adaptable than others.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Either in terms of mindset and some also in terms of are companies able to adapt physically? Some industries, the change just physically isn't possible.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to be realistic as well. I worked in the financial services industry for many years, and we always had that issue of like legacy systems, right? I mean, you have organizations that have invested so much in the technology of the day over the last few decades. And it's very difficult to kind of toss all of that and start the investments you need to do to prepare for the future now, knowing that you might have to change that in a few years. You might have to, you know what I mean? So absolutely, it's a tough time we're all in. That's just it's the truth of it. But there is a bit of I don't know if it's a saying or just if you're trying to ignore reality, after a while that starts to look like insanity, right? Like we have to accept things as they are and adapt to them. It is what it is, essentially.
There are some industries that are going to die out.
I mean, we mentioned adaptation a couple of times already. I mean, my undergrad degree was actually in biology, so that's what nature does, right? As we evolve, some species adapt and some are not able to, and they're, I think it's the way it is. And again, it's especially why we're comfortable with change and move in the direction of adaptation to avoid sort of kind of keep going till you can't anymore.
I guess one company that's an example of having been the ostrich putting their head in the sand was Kodak.
Yeah, there's few examples. Yeah, for sure. Kodak, although they're coming back in an interesting way now. Blockbuster is always my favorite memory of this because, when Netflix came on the scene, it was very obvious that these guys were plugged into what was happening. But because Blockbuster had invested so much in the brick and mortar stores and in it was very difficult for them to adapt, right? And essentially they had to go out of business. Yeah. So yeah, it's, sometimes you just have to make those changes.
That's it. I was also thinking about the fact that the different points of view of the employer and the employee to the changing workplace. As things become more remote and agile workers, I think through this pandemic now, for example, the primary concern which companies had was, will there be a decline in performance and productivity because people are working remotely? Whereas for the individual employee, the question was rather, will I have the tech set up to do my job properly? Will I be isolated from my colleagues? And similarly, will my privacy at home be invaded? Those were the concerns the employee was battling with. It seems almost a problem that resides in the IT department as far as home setup and within the HR department as well. How can companies adapt to create an environment that addresses the concerns of both the employer in terms of productivity and employee in terms of work-life balance and a home setup?
Yeah, I think on the side of the employers, I think there is, and we've seen that over the last several months, there is need for a lot of flexibility. If you think about parents whose kids are at home, and they have to deal with, their kids going to school online, but at the same time logging into work during the workday, it's very difficult to balance. And so a lot of employers are realizing that perhaps expecting you to work the 9 to 5 is not realistic. Perhaps we focus more on the objectives and you delivering. So the focus becomes on the output. And if you can get your work done between 5 p.m. and 11 p.m., that's just well and good. So I think that type of flexibility required on the side of the employers. I think when you think about technology specifically, support for the employees is important, especially when you think about Africa, right? We're both using the internet, and there's, at the back of my mind, there's a prayer that my internet doesn't go off because that tends to happen, right? So I think just providing support, so you'll see more companies providing data plans, more reliable data for the employees, for example. Some employees live in places where it's just very difficult to have these online conversations because of a lot of background noise. I think of a place like Nigeria, there's usually power generators going in the background. And so as an employer, you start to have to think about the employee's life in general and how to make it a little bit easier for them to be productive at work. I think on the side of the employees, at the end of the day, you're trying to keep your job. You're trying to earn a paycheck. And you're trying to adapt as much as possible. And I think that's what we're seeing. I can't necessarily say that, there's so many, there aren't a lot of changes that you can demand, I don't think, at this point as an employee, except to just try to adapt as much as possible. But I think flexibility from the employers is really, really key.
Which brings us to the last question of the day. Leaders of the future. In a world where scientists, engineers, data analysts are actually the main producers of the services that make our businesses run, whether it's a factory or an IT company, you are so dependent upon these highly intelligent, possibly volatile, possibly independent workers. As managers, you almost have to become a super boss. Not only you may not be need to develop, understand the power of the tech, but you have to come to grips with the power of the people who that tech. The leader of the future will probably more likely coach than command.
Yes.
And is likely to lead with empathy rather than with ego. So
absolutely.
It's a big change from the way corporates used to run their companies to the way you'll need to adapt in the future.
Absolutely.
Expand on that a little and just give our leaders of the future and some motivation and inspiration.
This is a really important question because the role of the leader, I think, is actually needed even more now than before. And it's actually potentially more important because you have a situation where, yes, there's a lot of very highly skilled people in the workforce with huge capacity to produce, but you have to be able to coordinate all of that to make sure that you're meeting the needs of the company or society at large. And there's a huge opportunity to do that if you're able to channel people's energies the right way. Which is where the leaders really come in. But I think instead of the typical, like you said, command manage type of leadership, it has to be about the person now. It has to be about helping individuals to be their absolute best selves. For you to be able to do that, you need to be at your absolute best. And for you to be at your absolute best, you need to be very, very aware of who you are, what's important to you, and guide from a place of authenticity. It's not about power anymore. I think it's about, like you mentioned, the empathy, the understanding of individuals' needs and preferences, and being able to adapt to those needs and preferences. As a leader, you have to adapt the way you deal with people to that individual. It's not necessarily about like, this is the right way to get things done anymore. You have to understand the individuals you're dealing with and how to get the best out of them. It's about motivation. It's about inspiration. And at the end of the day, it's like you said, you're a coach and your support system for people a lot of times in the workplace. Like we have alluded to several times here, it's a time of very high anxiety. So, be your engineers or data analysts or whoever, they also are dealing with these anxieties. And how do you as a leader help them to quell those and remain productive and continue to grow and continue to adapt as this environment changes? So I think for you to be that kind of leader, you have to invest a lot of time and energy in yourself to develop yourself and be that person, and then guide people to be there. That's my view on that.
And then final comment, you have started your company 2 years ago and you are highly qualified in the field of the future of work. I think that it's only fitting that you have a little plug for your company at this stage, because I think they do a lot of training that would address exactly these kind of issues. So maybe just give us, 30 seconds on practical things that your company does that perhaps others could pick up on and learn from.
Sure. I mentioned we do focus on both individuals and organizations. For individuals, we do trainings. We do specific trainings on preparing yourselves for the future of work. We develop content, so specific content packets that organizations can use to train individuals. And this could range from areas like financial literacy to basic digital literacy to sort of more advanced how to be technically adept, for example. And we develop packets on specific topics depending on what the employer needs to train their people on. For executives, we help a lot of sort of what I've touched on, how to be the manager of the future, how to get the best of your people, how to guide them in this journey that feels very ambiguous and anxiety-provoking in a way that is adaptable for both them as individuals and also for the organization. And finally, just how to build around, collaborative efforts or build on collaborative efforts to make sure that the organization is its best self now, but also making those changes that are needed. So those are the services. They're very tailored to the needs of the organizations usually.
Well, thank you very much. Goodbye, Miss Banjo.
Thank you.
And the greatest of luck with your venture. I really think that we need more companies like yours and more individuals like you to help us adapt to the world that we are already in, never mind going to be in.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.